Back to MetFlex and Chill. This is Rachel Greger, your host, and I'm here with one of my best friends, Robert Sikes, aka Keto Savage. What's up, Robert?
What's going on, Rachel? Thank you so very much for the opportunity. I'm excited to be here.
I'm so happy you're here. It's been a long time coming. Can't wait to grill you on all the things.
Let's do it. I'm an open book.
Sweet. All right. So before we get into that, do you want to share just a little bit about who you are, your background, just a brief description, and then we can kind of dive into your background a little bit more because I really want to grill you on all that. So.
Yeah. So I've been bodybuilding for about 12 years now. The first 6 of those years was with the traditional like bro diet approach to nutrition. And that worked in the sense that I was able to get really lean and place very well at shows, but it just wasn't sustainable from like a health standpoint. And I would have those crazy bulking cycles and the crazy cutting cycles. And I developed a lot of eating disorders in the process. So I was kind of experimenting and looking for alternative dieting protocols that would be better for me. And I kind of stumbled on keto by accident by incorporating a diet called carbohydrate backloading developed by John Kiefer. And that worked well, but I noticed that I felt better before I introduced the carbs in the evening. So I basically just did carb backloading without the carbs. And lo and behold, that was keto. And I had started playing around with that back in 2014, I believe. So this was pretty much before keto got, popular. And I started doing that from a bodybuilding perspective. And I just felt so much better. It felt so much more sustainable for me. I was able to kind of beat my eating disorders and get on top of my nutrition and just have a better relationship with my body and what kind of foods I was supposed to be feeding my body from a performance standpoint. And all the people in the gym that I was training at the time said, you can't bodybuild without carbs. It just isn't going to work. Best of luck to you. And I'm like, well, I'm going to go ahead and give it a shot and see what happens. So I decided to do my entire 2017 competition prep in a steady ketosis. And lo and behold, I got my pro card that year. I looked better than I ever had doing a traditional bro dieting. And that's when I was pretty much sold on the concept of you can compete at a high level and reach new heights with a strict ketogenic approach. And I've since then just kind of developed and dedicated my life to spreading that message, teaching others what I've learned over the years, and just trying to get the word out to what's possible and what you can do to be the best you that you can.
Awesome. Awesome. I love it. So I feel like there's so many different areas we can go down and questions that I have, but I do want to start kind of with this and something that I've been super fascinated about, over the past year, I would say, in terms of this concept of like nutritional periodization. So periodizing your nutrition and looking more towards like the long term versus kind of the short term, even, like a year from now versus 2 months from now. Because a lot of people who, and I want to talk about this too in the sense of kind of like general population, not necessarily like bodybuilding population, because I think a lot of the gen pop, it's like you go on a diet or whatever and you're thinking the short term, but you're not thinking long term. You're not thinking about, obviously a lot of people go on a diet because they want to change their body composition. And can we talk a little bit about the importance of periodizing your nutrition and going through, these kind of cuts and maintenance and quote unquote bulking, and why that's not just for bodybuilders, but for, the general population and those people who do want to really just build their best physique, and why it's important to realize that, you can't be in a caloric deficit 24/7, 365 days a year. That's not going to be advantageous. And obviously it depends where you're coming from, right? But like if you want to be building muscle in an optimal state, like being in a caloric deficit might not be the best thing for you. And so can you just talk to a little bit of maybe kind of how you look at nutritional periodization in terms of going through cuts, going through periods of maintenance, going through periods of bulking, and like how kind of what you've seen from that, and then also working with your clients?
Yeah, for sure. So let me preface this conversation with saying that, I'll talk about this from a perspective of a bodybuilder, and people will automatically like tune me out if they're not wanting to be a bodybuilder because they assume that the same rules do not apply. But the beauty of bodybuilding, especially natural bodybuilding, is it allows me to really, have like a good pulse on how my body's responding to all these different manipulations. And that same response is happening to the general population. It's just happening on a scale that's not really as you can't really feel it because you're not that lean. You're not as in tune with your body. When you get down to like sub 3% body fat, you can feel every little manipulation you're making. But all these principles that I'm incorporating on myself and my clients are applicable to people no matter where they're at in life. So definitely want to throw that out there. With regard to this fluctuation and this like going through these different phases, I think that's incredibly important because I feel like maintenance is false. Like there's no such thing as maintenance. You're either getting better or you're getting worse in life. There's no pause button. I mean, you're not getting any younger. So if you're not improving in some form or fashion, then you're going downhill. And having a standalone building phase and a standalone cutting phase allows your body and your mind to make this entire process much more sustainable. And you're going to see a lot more improvement as you cycle through these different phases. You just try and maintain, quote unquote, you're going to go downhill because you're not giving your body any reason to adapt or to change because you're just letting it be in its comfort zone. Having some kind of stressors in the form of a building phase in which you're at a caloric surplus and prioritizing muscle growth, or in a cutting phase in which you're having some of that cell autophagy, having this loss in body fat, like both ends of that spectrum have a hormetic effect on the body and cause it to want to improve and adapt to that improve. So I think having those, whether you're a bodybuilder or just a person that's wanting to live a healthier, more sustained and, beneficial life is going to be worth your while for sure.
Gotcha. Okay. So what if someone listening to this is like, okay, well, I don't really want to go through those, or maybe I want to go through like an initial kind of losing body fat phase and then just maintain after that, and I don't really, care about going through these phases. What would you say to that? Or like what advice would you give someone who is maybe thinking that way?
Yeah, so like I get that a lot. I mean, it's funny because if you were to poll most guys, they're like, I just want to get huge and walk through walls. And if you poll most female, they're just like, I just want to lose weight and fit in my jeans better, look good in bikini season, But you kind of have to mesh the two. I mean, having like a lot of people want to build muscle and lose body fat. Like if I ask somebody, what's your primary goal? They're like, I want to build muscle, lose body fat. But yeah, everybody wants to do that. But it's better to like prioritize one of those because they're somewhat competitive for one another. Like if you're wanting to truly optimize muscle growth, you're going to need to be in a surplus so that your body's got enough fuel coming in to rebuild, repair, and grow more muscle tissue. Whereas if your goal is to optimize for fat loss, you need to be in somewhat of a caloric deficit to truly maximize your efficiency at losing that body fat. So having these phases in which you're prioritizing either building or cutting is going to allow your body to truly tap into the full potential it can during that phase. And then when you cycle into the next phase, you're going to be able to truly maximize the efficiency there, as opposed to just trying to like stay middle of the road. You're not really going to make any progress. Whereas you have a dedicated phase, you can make a lot of progress and then even more progress when you cycle to the next phase. And the overarching goal is to just improve your baseline starting point each time you cycle through these phases. So like in your example of a female that wants to lose some body fat and then maintain, if they're going to maximize the efficiency at which they lose that body fat, they're going to probably be in a caloric deficit. They're going to probably ramp up their cardio, and then they're going to downregulate the metabolism because a slight downregulation of metabolism is just one of the things that comes with being in a caloric deficit. Totally natural, but it's just going to happen. If you do that, lose that body fat, and then you try and maintain at that low caloric and metabolic rate, your body's baseline is not really in an optimal situation. You're not going to really be able to build muscle, and you can't really sustain a very low caloric intake and a very low fat loss for very long. Your body's just going to start slowing down and shutting down. So it's important to, have that yin and yang effect and ramp that back up at some point.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. I would say, so like, just kind of from my experience working with clients, I do have a lot of, like I work with a lot of women and they come to me and really a lot of the clients that I've worked with, at least over the last like year, they have had significant changes in or ability to body recomp, right? So they've had the ability to lose body fat and gain muscle at the same time because they went from first, not following any type of, maybe they followed a structured nutrition protocol, but they weren't following like a structured lifting protocol and resistance training to including progressive overload. So, doing a little bit better every single week. So we're able to, structure their nutrition a little bit better and then also implement a structured nutrition resistance training program. And those two things help them to body recomp. And I'm kind of thinking about one client I just talked to yesterday who just finished her fat loss phase, and she lost like 2.5 pounds on the scale, but she looks completely different because she was not following any type of structured resistance training program. her pictures are like night and day, and the scale number, it's like 2 pounds. So she effectively recomped, right? But this is because she is, I would say a novice or kind of on the lower end of the intermediate versus someone who has been maybe dieting for a long time or following a structured resistance training program, and they get to like this body weight and they're just like, I don't like how I look, right? And I don't know what to do from here. I'm afraid to eat a little bit more. I'm afraid to kind of go into that surplus. So I think that it just comes down to like where you're coming from too. So if you're like a complete newbie to these things, I feel just from my experience, and I don't know about you and like with your clients, you can, recomp, right? But it gets to a point where you've kind of, and that's where I'm at right now. Like I've pretty much pulled out all of my recomposition capacity for my current body weight and where I'm at. So now I'm in like a slight surplus, focusing on quote unquote bulking and gaining more muscle, and going through that. But anyway, now I'm just rambling on. So I do want to talk kind of about these concepts of, as we're on this subject of, going into a surplus, in terms of reverse dieting and kind of, I know, and the thing is, I want to kind of address this in a way that is more for the gem pop, because I know that like pretty much a lot of people listening to this podcast are not like bodybuilders, so they've not gone down to that extreme leanness and then they have to reverse out of it. So can you kind of give us your perspective, obviously for you, but then also working with your clients after you do, bring them through a cutting phase and then you implement a reverse diet or a recovery diet? Maybe you can just talk about like what you've noticed with them and then also with yourself, but maybe in the sense where people can understand this from a gen pop mentality versus like a bodybuilding mentality, right? Not that they're different mentalities, but like there's a different kind of extremeness. Like when you get super lean for bodybuilding, it's a little bit different than if you just got, leaner.
Right.
Does that make sense? Is that a super confusing question?
No, it makes total sense.
Okay.
I've never heard someone say gin pop so many times.
I don't know why I keep saying, I've never said that so many times, but I'm just kind of like thinking through things. Anyway, you go.
Yeah. So with reverse dieting, basically the whole concept is it is the reverse of dieting. So if dieting is defined as stripping away calories, prioritizing fat loss, reverse of that would be increasing calories and prioritizing muscle gain. So for instance, when I'm taking myself or my clients or anybody through a competition prep or just a fat loss phase, at the end of that, the last little tail end, let's say the last month, calories are going to be at their lowest. And I don't ever recommend just hacking calories off by a massive amount. Like I'm very, very gradual with my caloric reductions. And towards that last month of the caloric deficit, your metabolism is downregulated. So I start incorporating some ketogenic caloric refeed. So basically I'll take whatever their baseline caloric intake is and start doing either a 1-day or 2-day consecutive caloric refeed. That kind of helps shunt the negative effects of that downregulated metabolism and keeps the body moving. That lasts for about a month and a half. Then at the very end of that, when calories are at their lowest, that's ideally the point at which you're stepping on stage, going through a photo shoot, peaking for an event, a wedding, whatever. And then at some point you have to start increasing calories back up from that point because you don't want to be at that very low caloric intake, indefinitely. So I'll start gradually incorporating increasing calories week after week after week, while also leveraging those refeeds that we implemented about a month prior. And basically what's happening is the weekly calories are increasing and the refeed calories are decreasing, and they're kind of more or less meeting in the middle, in which case that refeed gets phased out and you can continue to increase your daily caloric intake. And basically what's happening is you're increasing calories and you're going to ramp up your body's metabolism. And you're also going to ramp up your body's ability to build muscle because you're transitioning from a deficit to more of a surplus. And during that time, you're still, training hard with your resistance weight protocol, and just focusing on building as much muscle as possible. And while you're doing that, what's happening is ideally you're going to wind up with a better composition and a higher caloric baseline than when you started this journey. So say you started a cut at 20% body fat, and then by the end of the cut, you got down to 10% body fat. And then you reverse diet up. By the end of that reverse diet, you're ideally eating more food than you were when you started the cut, but you're at 15% body fat now instead of the 20. So your baselines have improved, and your body fat and composition have also improved. So the next time you transition into a cut, you've got more calories to work with and a better baseline composition starting point to work with. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, yeah. And so it's pretty much the same, it's pretty much the same kind of idea. And this is what I was trying to get at. Like, yes, there's differences between, there's different kind of extremes between Gen Pop and bodybuilding, but it's pretty much all these concepts, like you said in the beginning, like they all kind of phase into each other. It's just kind of,
Mhm.
maybe it's a little bit different, but they're pretty much all the same. So implementing like a reverse diet and things like that is part of the process, because a lot of there's a stat out there that a lot of people who lose there's actually 90% of people who lose weight will gain it back, and it's
Mhm.
because they don't understand these different concepts of periodizing nutrition, implementing these strategic ways of doing things. So yeah, anyway, yes, that made sense. I do want to talk a little bit about, so like after you finish the reverse, right? So, and this is something that you talked about like a few weeks ago, I think, and I told you I was going to ask you about it, but this, going back to this term maintenance, right? A lot of
Mhm.
people kind of think about maintenance. They're like, all right, I have to consume 2,000 calories to maintain my weight. That's it. Like, that's what I'm going to consume. Like, if I want to maintain, if I'm one of those person who just wants to maintain, like, that's what I'll consume and I'll just maintain there. But can you talk about how maintenance isn't really just this static number, and it's really kind of a range, and it can be a broad range for some people or maybe a narrow range for others?
Yeah, so maintenance is basically defined as the caloric intake, taking all the other factors into consideration, like your age, your sex, your muscle mass, your activity levels, and saying, okay, if I eat this amount of calories, everything stays stable. And there is a lot of flux in that. I mean, there's a pretty broad window there, some broader than others. So for me, I can basically maintain my 177-pound typical average weight, whether I'm eating 2,900 calories a day or 3,700 calories a day. So that's a pretty broad window. Most people's windows are not that broad. The more muscle you have, generally speaking, the broader your window. Um, so it's important to kind of know where the different thresholds are, your upper limit and your lower limit. So like if I was to be able to maintain my weight at 3,700 calories, and I start my prep at 3,700 calories, I have to go through several weeks of gradually cutting down calories before I see any movement in the scale or improvement in the composition. So I like to have a pulse on what the range of that window is. But maintenance calories are always going to be fluctuating. And ideally, if you're trying to always be improving, then you're going to continue to weight train. And as you weight train, ideally with the progressive overload principle, you're going to continually build lean muscle tissue. The more lean muscle tissue you have, the more your body demands more calories to be able to sustain that muscle tissue. So it would make sense that your maintenance, if you're doing everything right, is going to gradually increase year after year after year.
Okay. And have you found that like over your, what did you say, 11 years of
Yeah,
bodybuilding?
I don't know. I was a junior in high school, so I don't know how old that would have made me, but yeah, probably about 11, 12 years now that I've been doing this.
And do you feel like it's like mostly because of your ability to build as like a significant amount of muscle, or?
Yeah, I mean, there are some other confounding variables, like when you get older, for instance, you're going to require, like, on average, a 55-year-old is going to require less calories to maintain than like a 25-year-old would.
Mhm.
But, if all things, the human body is not a closed system, but if you were to look at this point alone from that closed loop system standpoint, as you're building more muscle year after year after year, it stands to reason that your caloric demands are going to increase in correlation to that increase in lean tissue.
Gotcha. Okay. And would you say too, like as you are kind of building, not, I don't like using this term, but revamping up, not revamping, I don't know the term. Yeah, maybe revamping your metabolism as you coming out of that fat loss phase, and you talked about this concept of metabolic adaptation and how um, a lot of people think like I shouldn't go on a diet because my metabolism slows down, and like we know that that's part of being on a diet. Like you're literally putting your body into somewhat of a starvation mode, which I don't like using that term anyway, and of course I'm going to use it. But you are downregulating your metabolism. That's part of it. It's not something that is happening. Like your body's very smart, and it's going to do
Mhm.
that when you are in a caloric deficit. So kind of just coming back to this concept of not, like, you can't be in a calorie deficit forever. You can't be dieting forever. So going through these phases is important, especially if you do want to optimize your physique and build a significant amount of muscle, which we know is, super healthy in the long term. And also if you want to eat more and not have to, you know, can be consuming lower calories for, a longer period of time. So
Can I say
anyway,
one thing on that to
yeah,
add something to it?
yes.
So I see a lot of females, especially like we'll just use a middle-aged female for this example from illustrative purposes, because I feel like a lot of middle-aged females fit this demographic, but they will be unhappy with their current weight or composition, and they'll be constantly under eating and just chronically in a caloric deficit. What's happening there is they may see some initial fat loss and it plateaus. So they take the calories lower. They see some initial weight loss and it plateaus. Take the calories lower. Before they know it, they've spent the majority of their lifetime in this chronic caloric deficit, and their metabolism has continually downregulated, which is going to have an adverse effect on their body's ability to build muscle. So they're going to have harder time building lean tissue, which is obviously good for longevity, skeletal structures, everything really. And what's happening is they've downregulated their metabolism and their caloric baseline for so long by so much that anytime they try to ramp their metabolism back up and include more calories, or if they've just been starving the whole time and try to eat more because they're hungry, which rightly so, they're not eating very much, then their body is going to initially think, hey, look, we're going to be starving. Food is a scarcity. Let's automatically take this calorie surplus that's coming in and immediately, basically partition it as stored adipose tissue and save it for a rainy day, because we have no reason to think that food is not scarce because they've chronically been under eating. Whereas if you have periods of overfeeding and giving your body enough food, ample food, and then some, it basically trains your body to think and realize that, hey, look, food is not scarce. We don't need to hold on to it as stored body fat. It's okay. We're going to have more coming in. Let's not worry about it. When you can get to the point where your metabolism is upregulated enough that you can consume, a surplus of calories and not have an adverse effect, that's when you know you're doing something right.
I love it. I love it. So if someone was listening to this now who is like, oh crap, that's me, right? What would your advice be for where they should kind of go from here?
Well, those individuals need to just accept and embrace the fact that they didn't get to this point overnight, and it's not going to be an overnight fix either. They're going to probably put on some body weight. They're probably going to put on some body fat. But if that is a necessary thing to do over the course of 6 months or even a year or two, but it sets them up for success that they can actually improve their composition and health, for the years to follow, it's a total worthwhile, expense, because you're going to wind up with a net gain in health in the long run. So I feel like if you can convince that individual, hey, look, this is what's going to happen. It's part of the process. You're going to put on a little bit of weight, but it's okay because you put on a little bit of weight, you're going to be in a much better position to lose more fat later. It's a worthwhile trade-off, in my opinion.
Completely agree. And I think it's one of those things where it comes back to like this instant gratification, which so many of us, in our generation, like that's what we look for. Like we want this to happen right now, right away, versus looking at the long term and realizing that, you're going to have to get a little bit uncomfortable in different directions to be able to get to where you want to be long term.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that I've been working with myself, like on myself, just, like I said, I'm in this kind of in a slight surplus right now, looking to build as much muscle as possible and getting a little bit uncomfortable with gaining a little bit of body fat in the process. And I think especially for women, it's just hard to accept that. And so I think working with a coach and having someone who can help guide you along the way is super important, because even for me, like I've had a coach for the last like almost 2 years now. And still every week I go through these times where I'm like in my own head and it's hard to get out of that. So I just think that's super beneficial. But yeah, anyway, I could ramble on about this forever.
No, I completely agree. We're speaking the same language.
Yeah, yeah. And so I guess last question on this point, in terms of, going into a surplus and building muscle, right, and that being your main focus, is there like, just based off of your kind of, diving into the research, diving into anecdotally, being in like being at maintenance or in a slight surplus, do you feel like you could still like build as much muscle versus being in a even higher surplus? Or like, what's your kind of take on that?
Yeah, you don't need to be in a crazy massive surplus. I mean, you want to be at some of it a surplus, but I mean, that surplus can be 200 to 500 calories, and that's going to still put you in a much better position to build muscle. There was like this philosophy going around for years that I fell victim to when I first got into bodybuilding was that you had to have this crazy dirty bulk and put on a ton of weight in order to build any muscle, which is not the case. And it's not only not the case, but it's just not healthy or optimal. I mean, there was one year where I bulked, this was pre-keto, I bulked up to 230 pounds in an off season, just assuming that I would compete at 200 pounds even. I figured I'd bulk up to 230 and then I'd cut down 30 pounds and compete at 200 and just be shredded. The reality of the situation was I bulked up to 230 pounds at a whopping height of 5'7.5", and I looked like a freaking, Goodyear blimp. And when I cut down for the competition, I lost 80 pounds. I competed at like 150, and I lost a ton of muscle in the process. I mean, it's much, much healthier, much more sustainable, much more enjoyable if you have a healthy off season and prioritize lean gains instead of just a bunch of fat that comes with it. And then when you cut down, you're not going to have to diet down near as aggressively, which is going to mean you're going to retain a lot more of the muscle you've built. So when you step on stage or whatever it is you're doing, if you can diet down less aggressively, retain more muscle, you're going to be having a net gain in muscle than if you had just gained a ton of body fat and muscle in the off season. So I don't ever recommend having that crazy dirty bulk cycle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I agree. That's kind of where I was going with that. So awesome. And then lastly, another thought came up too. So actually one of my clients asked me this last week, and she said, why do I have to put on body fat in order to gain muscle? Can you kind of talk to that point where maybe you're not putting on a ton of body fat, but usually you do put on a little bit of body fat with in that kind of bulking phase? Like, why can't we just put on muscle and not put on the body fat?
I mean, there's a lot that goes into it, but to make it like a high level view, like you need to be in somewhat of a caloric surplus to prioritize building muscle. And if your body sees that you're in a surplus, it's going to take that surplus and just store it where it can. Now, if you're not really resistance training, if you're not giving your body a reason to build muscle, the majority of that is going to be partitioned off to that body fat and adipose tissue. If you are training hard and giving your body reason to put that increase in calories and that surplus towards building lean tissue, it's going to partition and prioritize building lean tissue. So you need to be in a surplus, and how you do your lifestyle factors, whether it's, are you going to sit on the couch and eat pizza to get that surplus? Or are you going to eat a well-calculated surplus and then put that effort into training, take those extra calories and put it towards quality training? Your body's going to prioritize and make a lot more muscle out of that.
Completely agree. I feel like I respond to that.
Yeah.
I completely agree. Awesome. Okay, so I think those were some of the questions I had, and then we did have some listeners' questions. That's why I'm looking over at my screen right here. But we had some listener questions, or some people on Instagram. I posted in my story if they had any questions for you. So we have a few that I want to go through if you're down.
I'm down. Let's do it.
All right. So first one. Oh, and then I just realized I had one personal question, but we'll come back to that. First one, what should you do when keto works fantastic until it doesn't? 3 years later and gaining weight again.
So a lot of people, like if they're coming from a heavily processed, high carbohydrate diet and they go keto for the first time, they can just basically do the high level keto recommendations of, the 75-25 ratio. They can have like the keto cheesecakes and all the fatty foods, all the butters, and just, get the ratios dialed in. And their body's going to like be so shocked by that change in, crappy food to quality food that they're going to see some initial, weight loss. They're going to see some composition improvements, and they're really going to start getting dialed in. However, as your body does adapt and becomes efficient at using ketones and using stored body fat for fuel, you're going to have to get more diet. It's kind of like the same thing as weight training. When you first start weight training, you're going to have those beginner gains and be able to put on 10, 15 pounds of muscle in your first year. Whereas if you're a seasoned lifter, you're doing good if you can put on 1, 2, or 3 pounds of muscle a year. The same is basically true with regard to your nutrition. If you've been doing this for a while, you got to get more fine-tuned, and you're going to see more marginal gains. They're not going to be as significant gains, but you can really get things dialed in. So I would argue that it doesn't ever stop working. You just have to be a lot more diligent and much more fine-tuned in what you're manipulating and what you're fine-tuning for your individual body.
Gotcha. Yeah. And would you say too, like, say for example, if this person went from, lost maybe 100 pounds or something, which is not unheard of, with people, especially within the keto space, I feel like I don't know. I've just heard a lot of that recently. Like I lost 100 pounds of keto and then it's not working anymore. Or like whatever, 50 plus pounds, kind of realizing that although we can, ramp those calories back up and ramp that maintenance back up, it's probably never going to get to the point where it was when you were 100 pounds heavier, because just, it takes less energy and less calories to move a smaller body, right? Would you
100%.
say, yeah.
Like for me, I've lost 80 pounds in a stint before, but like when I'm doing a competition prep now with my current baseline, I lose about 20 pounds. Those first 15 pounds come off a lot easier than the last 5 pounds. You got to kind of expect that when you go into it.
Yeah, yeah, agreed. And then while we're talking about pounds, I do want to ask you, so I know you're someone just like me who does, weigh themselves every day and uses that as a data point in the grand scheme of everything else. Can you talk a little bit to this idea of the scale and the number on the scale just being a data point in time, and then also to the fact that, the daily fluctuations in the scale matter much less than the trends over weeks, over months, and how looking at that, not, if you're looking at the daily fluctuations and you're getting, mentally, it's just messing with your head, how you've kind of transitioned to not paying attention to that, daily fluctuation and really just, again, thinking about the long term.
Yeah.
What's kind of your experience with that, with your clients and with yourself?
So a lot of people look at the scale and they'll wake up, they'll jump on the scale. If it's not showing them the number they want, it totally ruins their day. And they'll justify just throwing the scale out the window because, hey, this is a negative thing in my life. I should be more intuitive. What difference does the scale make anyways? And I would argue that that's honestly just a lack of maturity in your philosophy and mental psychology towards what this data is telling you. Like, it's just a data point. Like, it's not good or bad. It's just a number. Your relationship to that number is all within your own head. So you're going to see day-to-day fluctuations. I mean, I could have a heavy leg day and wake up 3 pounds heavier. I've been deep into a contest prep and binged on pickles and woke up 8 pounds heavier and freaked out. It's just going to happen. Like, you're going to see fluctuations with your electrolytes, with your water. If you're traveling, if you don't sleep very well, those fluctuations are totally normal. And that's why if you're tracking on a regular basis and you're tracking the trend lines, you can see how the manipulations you're making are having an effect over time. And that's where the insightful data is actually used. So like if I'm focusing on building and I'm seeing a gradual increase in scale weight, but I'm taking measurements, I'm taking skin fold caliper tests, and I'm tracking my strength, then that increase in the scale is associated with a good thing in my book. If I'm trying to lose body fat and I'm seeing an increase in the scale, and if I'm binging on foods and not staying on top of my macronutrient goals, then I'll see that, okay, something's happening in an adverse way. But if you're doing everything right, if you're tracking everything diligently and you're doing what you're supposed to be, then that's a very insightful data point that you can use to manipulate the variables you're changing and get things dialed in to reach the desired goal more efficiently.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah.
Completely agree. Yeah, and then also to that, though, to the point that I talked about before, the scale, like you said, the scale is just a data point, but it can be very useful. But in some people who are able to go through this body recomposition, sometimes it can be, like I said, the client who lost 2.5 pounds on the scale over like a 4-month period, but completely changed her body. We were taking pictures, her body tape measurements were going down, but the scale just wasn't budging. So I think that's why it's super important to have these different metrics. And if you're just using the scale, it's probably not the best tool alone, because kind of those things can happen, right? So do you always recommend kind of doing other metrics as well?
Yeah. So like when I'm really trying to get things dialed in, I'll do the scale every day. I'll do bi-weekly pictures, measurements, and skin fold tests, and then I'll do like a monthly DEXA or InBody. Like if I've got everything at my disposal, that's what I'll use. I mean, the pictures tell a ton. They say a picture tells 1,000 words for a reason. I mean, I put a lot of weight in that because there's been numerous occasions where I would not see hardly any fluctuation in the scale. It'd be pretty much constant. And you could easily think, oh, I've plateaued, nothing's changing. But if you look at pictures or measurements or something, and you notice that, hey, something's really moving in the right direction, then stay the course. Don't feel like you have to, go off and deviate to do something else. So yeah, having other metrics outside the scale is huge.
Yeah, for sure. Awesome. All right, let's get to the next question. Okay, I know you promote high fat. Is there any reason to taper fat down and increase protein?
I need to drink of water for this one. All right, so
the loaded one.
I'm like painted in the picture. Like people paint me into this corner of, oh, Robert Sikes, he's the high fat guy. I'm not the high fat guy. I am not the high protein guy. I am the whatever works best for you guy. And I don't have like none of my macronutrient ratios are constant either, just as calories are constantly fluctuating depending on what phase I'm in, what my goals are. My macronutrient ratios are also fluctuating. And I talk a lot about having protein thresholds, and everybody's protein threshold is going to be very individualized and different for each person. So what I like to do is start people at a higher fat ratio so that they can have time to get more deeply adapted and truly become efficient using fats, whether it's dietary fat or stored fat. And then I'll titrate that protein intake up and that fat intake down until we establish their protein threshold. I've got clients that are eating a 1-to-1 ratio. I've got clients that are performing best at a 80% fat ratio. I've got clients that are performing best at a 60% fat ratio. Like it's going to be very, very individualized. And my protocol involves seeing what that individual factor comes into play at. And that's going to be, constantly manipulating protein and fat to see where you're at on that threshold. And that's going to change over time, depending on what your composition is like, what your resistance training is like, what your body fat percentage is like. So I don't ever want people to think that I'm just always the high fat guy. I mean, it's totally individualized. I do typically recommend having more dietary fat than protein, in the context of having healthy amount of protein, because if you're fat adapted, it stands to reason that you want to have more energy. And if you're getting your energy from the fat, it makes sense to have plenty of energy coming in. So I typically recommend a higher fat ratio, but it's all going to be individualized depending on what they respond best to.
Gotcha. Okay. And then in that realm, would you say like with your clients, have you ever incorporated like increasing carbohydrates?
Ooh, I should take another break. So not really. I mean, I typically have total dietary carbohydrates at a pretty low intake. I mean, if you're keto and your body is deriving its primary fuel source from fat and ketones, and you have adequate protein to build lean tissue and preserve lean tissue, then any carbohydrates you're getting are not really predominantly used for fuel. So I have some trace carbohydrates coming in. I've got clients with trace carbohydrates coming in based off of the other foods they're eating, but they're not using those carbohydrates to, drive their energy demands, if that makes sense.
Hmm. Okay. So would you say like, and I know you knew this question was coming in terms of kind of building your metabolic flexibility and
Hmm.
being able to kind of go between fuel sources depending on where you're at, in your life and your goals and all of that. What's your kind of viewpoint on this concept of metabolic flexibility? Um,
So I am 100% pro metabolic flexibility. If you define metabolic flexibility as having the ability to tap into your stored body fat for fuel. So like if someone's coming from a traditional, standard American diet in which they're eating a lot of processed foods, a lot of carbohydrates, their body hasn't been in a ketonic state since birth and they were drinking breast milk. So it benefits them immensely to be metabolically flexible and for their body to be able to tap into their stored fat and dietary fat for fuel. However, once they've reached that point and they become keto adapted, then it's not like their body forgets how to use carbohydrates. Like I haven't had a carbohydrate based meal in 6 years, but if I was to eat a piece of pie right now or a cinnamon roll, my body would know what to do with it. I may get a little bit of a headache because I haven't had one in 6 years, but a couple of days of having more carbohydrates and that headache would totally dissipate. Similar to if you've been eating carbs your whole life and then switch over to keto, you're going to have a little bit of a keto flu-like symptom. That's mitigated if your electrolytes are in check, if you're well hydrated, et cetera, et cetera. But your body doesn't ever forget how to use glucose. I mean, there's no scientific literature that would suggest otherwise. So I don't feel like I need to switch back and forth because I prefer how I function with a fat-based approach.
Gotcha. And would you say like in terms of like a lifestyle standpoint, have you had any clients who are just like, I feel good on keto, I love it, but I miss fruit. Like I want to incorporate, some more fruit into my diet. I want to incorporate some more like sweet potatoes or like whole food carbs and just that's what I want to do, especially like in season, right? Like in the
Hmm.
summertime if they want to, if they have a I don't know, strawberry garden in their backyard. I don't even know why I said that. You know what I mean, right? They just want to start incorporating a little bit more fruits and maybe some squash and things like that, which is kind of what I went through. Have you
Hmm.
had clients, go through that? And like, what's your approach if you have, or?
Yeah, so like I am not a member of the keto police. I do not have a badge or a gun, and I'm not walking around analyzing what people are eating. Like if they want to eat carbohydrates, then more power to them. I feel like this is more so a psychological question than it is a physiological question. From a physiological standpoint, I don't think your performance is going to be inherently benefited by having some strawberries or some soft serve ice cream with sprinkles, like natural or not. I don't feel like your performance is going to be benefited from eating a bunch of carbohydrates if you're trying to make the most of your fat adaptation. However, if you want to have some of these foods and you're able to psychologically embrace that, and it's not going to lead to you having some kind of eating disorder or going down a dark path that led many people towards keto in the first place because they couldn't handle that relationship with carbohydrates, then go for it. Like my dad is a perfect example. He's not keto. He never will be keto, but he's very healthy and he eats a whole food diet that involves a lot of meats, a lot of healthy fats, and carbs when he wants them. And he doesn't have a bad relationship with food. Like I said, he's very healthy. He's very active, and more power to him. Like, who am I to say that he should or shouldn't eat a certain way? But there's a lot of people out there that have, disordered eating. They have a addiction to carbohydrates. And for me to suggest to them that, hey, look, you're missing out if you can't have these carbs, that's like offering, a smoke or a cigarette or an alcoholic drink. I don't want to do that. But if you can do both, if you can flirt that line and it doesn't have a negative impact on you physically or mentally, then go for it. I just personally like to prioritize and optimize for my performance. And I feel like my performance is benefited more by staying strict keto.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, so I think, at the end of the day, it just comes back to figuring out, like, because like you said, we're all individuals, right? Figuring out what works best for us, both from a physiological and a psychological and a lifestyle, long term uh, within those goals, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
also realizing that it's going to change too. Like, as you go throughout your lives, as your goals change, like this might change, right? You don't have to be married to anything in terms of a dietary protocol forever. Like, it's okay to experiment with things and try new things, but also realize like you probably like know your limitations, right? And realize that you can, experiment, but there comes to a point that each of us has our own limitations. So whether that's someone who's, struggled with carbs or sugar in the past, and if you maybe start to incorporate those again, you feel like you're going back down that rabbit hole of some type of disorder or anything like that, then maybe you have to pull back and realize that maybe that's not for you. So I don't know. End of the day, I just think that everybody's so individualized, and it really just comes back to finding what works for you. So would you agree?
Yeah. Yeah, totally. And like I eat veggies. There was like a movement going on for a little while there where like veggies were like demonized. And carnivore is really popular right now. And if carnivore works really well for you, then more power to you. I'm pretty much carnivore with keto bricks. I don't eat a whole lot of vegetables. But when I do want vegetables, like I eat them and I don't feel bad about it. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's not like something that I feel should be demonized. I mean, I don't really want a salad that often, but whenever I'm craving a salad, I eat a big one and I don't think twice about it. So having enough flexibility in your life to, go through different cravings is great. Now, I don't think, you can justify eating a bunch of cookies and ice cream from like a performance standpoint and think that the main thing I want to avoid is I want to avoid people thinking that they're missing out from their full potential if they don't eat carbohydrates. Like that's why I did the whole ketogenic bodybuilding thing, because so many people told me that I couldn't be competitive as a bodybuilder at an elite level without carbohydrates. And there's so many sports in which people excel at a very high rate with a strict ketogenic approach. So I want to be, a light to those people saying, look, you're not missing out if you choose to not have carbs in your life. And if you can handle carbs and it's not having a negative physical or psychological effect on you, then more power to you. That's basically where I'm
Yeah,
saying.
I love it. Love it. Awesome. All right, we have two more questions, and then I want to talk about a little bit of a few business things, if you're
All
down.
right. Sounds
All right,
good.
sweet. Okay, so next question. How long do you, oh, this one's kind of funny. How long do you plan to keep up that amount of muscle? It seems super time consuming.
Um, I just love it. Like it's not really, it's kind of funny because so many people view building muscle, losing fat as this like, insurmountable just burden in their lives. Like whenever I get to that point, I'm just going to stop doing it. But like, I love training. Like training is my therapy. Like I don't meditate. I probably should, but I don't. But my training scratches that itch for me. Like I wake up in the morning, I work for a few hours, and then I go for a walk, and then I train. And that to me is just, I love it. It's just as much part of my day as brushing my teeth is. So for that reason, it's not like a burden, and it's not something that I can ever see myself stepping away from. So I'm just going to keep doing it.
Yeah. No, I completely agree too, because I am the same way. Like, and I think it just comes down to like the individual, right? Like, I love going to the gym. I love pushing my body and seeing what it can do, whether it's, to build more muscle or going through a fat loss phase and seeing, you know, what, how, I've been going through this concept lately. It's getting comfortable with the uncomfortable.
hmm
And so I think that doing that and going through those periods of time, you continuously just building your resilience, just with not just your body, but also your mind. And I know you completely agree with this, but like, and like you said, some people are like, why would you put yourself through like these phases, right? These, why would you put yourself through a diet to like, what's the point? Or why would you, put yourself through going to the gym every day? Like, what's the point? It's like, I like doing that. Like, I like pushing myself, and I like, having goals to work towards. But
hmm
not everybody has to do that, right? Not everybody has to, like, if that's not for you, then that's not for you. But I would say that it is important, obviously, for everyone to probably, pay attention to their nutrition in some aspect, and then also do some type of resistance training just for overall health and longevity, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be super extreme, but there's a spectrum. And I think, right? What do you think about that?
Yeah, yeah. You don't have to be a bodybuilder by any means to benefit from just getting out and moving. Like anybody that's going to want the most out of their health span is going to want to have some type of activity that's going to stimulate their muscles. So using my dad as an example again, he doesn't even know what a bicep curl is. He's probably never done one in his whole life, but he works on the farm. He's an academic, so he didn't get a whole lot of physical activity as a professor, but he does a lot of physical work outside. And like if you're into hiking, do that. Like whatever you're into doing, just do that and enjoy it. And if you enjoy it, it's going to be much more sustainable for you in the first place, and you'll likely keep it up for your lifetime. And if you're constantly stimulating your body's, joints, muscles, skeletal structure from that activity, then you're going to be much better off for it long term.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Awesome. All right, last question. Why would someone begin losing muscle? Not enough calories or not enough exercise?
Both. So if you are not eating enough food for too long, I mean, not eating enough food is catabolic in nature. Your body's going to try and take that from somewhere, which is going to often be from stored body fat or lean muscle tissue. You can preserve that lean muscle tissue in the context of a caloric deficit by continually lifting hard and heavy. That's why I try to continue lifting heavy throughout the entirety of my contest prep. If you're not eating enough, that's going to be catabolic in nature. And if you're not training, that's also going to be catabolic in nature. So either of those two could have a negative effect on losing muscle.
Gotcha. Okay, makes sense. All right, those are all the questions we had from the listeners or Instagrammers, I guess you can call them.
Thank you,
So,
Instagrammers.
yes, thank you for all the questions. So I want to dive into a little bit. How much time do we have? Do you have some time? Like
Oh, yeah, I'm wide open. Most
10,
of your
15 minutes?
podcasts go an hour, so I'm committed
Yeah,
to going
yeah.
longer than an hour. I'm gonna be the longest one.
All right, let's do it. Okay, but I want to dive into a little bit of you and your kind of businesses over the years. So I feel very fortunate to, have met you, probably like 6 years ago now.
Where did we meet? We met at a conference, wasn't it?
No, we met. I was actually the first podcast that I was ever on was the Ketogenic Athlete with Danny
That's
and
right.
Brian,
Yep.
and then they introduced me to you, I think. That was
That's
like
what it was.
yeah, like
That was
five
a
or
long time ago. Long
yeah.
time.
So I've been like, I mean, if the people don't know, like we've been friends for a while, and I've always looked up to you and admired everything that you do, and I like I say this to you all the time. Like, I want to be like Robert and Crystal when I grow up because you guys are just awesome in terms of just everything and just. So I want to talk a little bit about like your businesses, and maybe you can just give us a quick. This is like not gonna be quick, but a snapshot of like just over the past 5 years, going from starting Keto Savage to where you're at now with Live Savage and Keto Brick, and I don't know, maybe just give us a little bit of like how you felt now looking back on your experience, and maybe like your top three kind of takeaways from it, whether good or
Yeah.
bad. I would love.
So this could be a super deep question for sure, but I started doing keto as a way to improve my disordered eating and just overall health, and it became a life changing phenomenon for me because when I got the relationship with food, established, I felt liberated. I felt like I had some serious screwed up issues. Like I was obsessive compulsive. I felt like a failure in life. I'd always wanted to build a business and I hadn't achieved that yet. So I felt like a failure from that perspective, and I felt like a failure from like a health standpoint because here I am trying to be a bodybuilder, and I can't even get my relationship with food in check. So I found keto, and that just worked. Like everything clicked. I felt better. I felt healthy, and I saw such progress with it that I wanted to commit to something that involved the ketogenic diet plus bodybuilding. And at the time, I was in Washington State. I had moved there after I graduated college, and I was working as a manager on the Burlington Northern Santa Fe Railroad, which was a good, career corporate job, but it wasn't fulfilling me at all. And I quit that job and basically just jumped ship and had like $250,000 in debt, and it was just bad. Like then I really felt like a failure because at the same time I had met Crystal and I was trying to pursue my first relationship with anybody and in her, and I was messing up there. So every aspect of my life was just crumbling to the ground, and I felt like the world would be better off without me. I was like suicidal at that point. And I walked out into the woods one day, watched the sunset, and I'm like, you know what? What is one thing that I'm very passionate about? What is one thing that I'm very good about? And how can I combine the two to create a career path for me? And I knew that I was passionate about ketogenic, bodybuilding, like all this stuff. So I'm like, let's just throw it all together and see what happens. So that's what I did. I started writing a book. I started creating content. At the time, I started watching a bunch of Gary Vaynerchuk, and he was all talking about documenting the process, showing people, don't have a fake it till you make it philosophy. Show people the very beginning stages. So that's what I was doing. I was podcasting and YouTubing in my closet because that was the only quiet room I had. And I was like, just freaking like nothing made sense looking back at it because I was so broke. And I would spend all of my time watching YouTube videos, learning how to watch a YouTube video, which I would record and then film and then edit and publish, and nobody would watch it. So I'm sitting here broke on the rocks in my relationship with Crystal, filming videos about how I eat my food, and nobody would even watch it. So I'm like, how is this going to create a life for me, And it was very bleak times, but it started to gain some traction and people started to notice, and I started to help people and, recommend how they can get out of their ruts in life regarding nutrition. And then it just kept leading to one thing to the next, the next, the next. So I started doing my competition prep in 2017. That's when I made the Keto Brick kind of out of my own self-desire because I needed to create something that fit that need for me. I scratched my own itch, so to speak. And people wanted that to be a product. So Crystal and I jumped into making that a product, and we bootstrapped that business. And a lot of countless nights, sleepless nights, full of tears and heartache, making that into a business. And the next thing you know, I've got Keto Savage, I've got coaching, I've got Keto Brick, which now employs several people, and we have 3 warehouse buildings. We just bought a massive building that we're going to renovate going forward. We started Live Savage Apparel. I've got a couple other businesses that are LLCs right now that I'm about to launch here in the near future. I mean, I've become a serial entrepreneur because I love the art of business. I mean, when you look at my passions, I'm a passionate person about fitness and nutrition, but I'm equally as passionate, if not more so, about business and how you can use business to spread a message that you have passion in and that you think you can add value and help others in. And that's basically been the summation of what I'm doing and trying to do. And I'm freaking addicted.
I know you are.
Yeah.
I love it though. It's amazing to watch and just being able to, watch, your YouTube over the years. And I remember like back 4 or 5 years, I can't even, what are we in 2020 now? Almost
Mm-hmm.
2021. It's crazy. Like I remember watching the YouTube videos when you were first put them out, when you were during that 2017 prep and before that, and just where you are now. It's just so cool to see like the growth and all of that. But I have a question for you. So if someone listening to this is like, I, maybe I'm in a job right now that I don't like, I'm just not passionate about it. It's not fulfilling, but I do, love health and fitness. Like I'm into fitness, I'm into health, I'm into nutrition, all of that. what advice would you give them if they wanted to like pursue their own, whether it's a coaching business or they have some type of product or anything like that? Like what advice would you give them? Or in the same sense, what would you tell yourself like 6 years ago when you were, putting up your first YouTube video and no one was watching it?
Yeah, so you kind of have to look at where you're at in life and be self-aware. A lot of people lack total self-awareness, so having self-awareness is first. But if it's just you, like at the time it was just me, nobody was relying on me to sustain their livelihood. So I would have been probably a little bit more conservative had I had a wife and kids that were relying on me. But at that time I had nobody. So I was okay with jumping ship from the corporate job. It was a hard decision, but I was okay with it because worst case scenario, the only one that's going to suffer from that decision is me. And when you take away that safety net of your corporate job, it allows you to see opportunities that you would never see otherwise. So have self-awareness enough to know if you can sustain that, if people are depending and relying on you, that's going to kind of affect your decision there. But if you can afford to do that, if you can't afford to just say, you know what, this is where I'm going in life, I'm unfulfilled. First of all, if you are unfulfilled in your job and you know what you're passionate about, then you owe it to yourself and the world to absolutely jump ship and do that thing, because your ability to put out great content is not going to happen if you're working a job that you are unfulfilled in. You cannot put out your best effort unless you're passionate about the work that you're doing, period. That's just all there is to it. So life is short. If you're not happy with where you're at in life, then pursue what's going to make you happy. I mean, otherwise, what's the point in living? So know and recognize that fact. And then as far as how to go about gaining the momentum and making it work, making it stick, you have to kind of look, at the market. I look back at the fact that I timed this pretty flawlessly. Like I didn't do it even intentionally. I was kind of luck in that regard because I started putting out keto content right before keto just boomed in popularity. And we all knew how that happened. I mean, keto just blew up and I was in the right place at the right time and passionate in the right things. So have enough self-awareness in yourself to know what you're passionate about and what you're good at, and if the market could support that passion. So that's some good starting points, I would say.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Awesome. I love it. All right, I want to end with two questions for you.
All right.
You ready?
Come at me. I'm ready.
Putting you on the spot. I feel like I've been putting you on the spot the whole time. But okay, first one. Is there anything you've personally been experimenting with or implemented lately in your own nutrition and lifestyle that you've noticed benefits from?
So yeah, I'm constantly experimenting with a lot of different things. Right now, I'm really trying to work on breathing. I just recorded a podcast with Nsima, who is the co-host of Mark Bell's Power Project podcast, and he kept talking to me about breathing techniques. So he said basically just nasal breathing all the way. So I've been trying to just train following a strict nasal breathing protocol. And I feel like I've only done a couple times now, but I feel like that has had a measurable positive impact on my training and just overall endurance. So that's one tangible thing I could tell the listeners. From a nutritional standpoint, I feel like I've just been playing around a lot with, finding, I think you and I kind of dove into finding what our maintenance window threshold is. So that's something that you and I both been doing. And I feel like that's very valuable. Which, do you know kind of what yours is? Just out of curiosity, put you on the spot for a change here.
Yeah, sure. So right now I ended my reverse from my last cut probably like 3 weeks ago now. No, 4 weeks ago, maybe a little more. I don't know. I don't know time anymore. I have it in my tracker, in my Excel sheet that I update every day. Do you still use an Excel sheet for yourself?
Yeah, I've got the Excel sheet and I've got my macros plus for tracking the macros. But yeah, I've got it all graphed out and I'm a
Yeah.
freaking numbers fanatic.
Yeah, for sure. So I've actually been I've been pushing up. I'm at like 2100, and the last 2 weeks I've actually been able to maintain there, but I feel like that's probably like the upper for where I'm at right now.
Hmm.
I was gaining a little bit faster over the last, so maybe it's been like 6 weeks since I started, quote unquote, my lean gains phase or my surplus phase. But I was getting a little bit faster than I wanted to, but I started to level out. So I probably gained like 5 pounds from my initial cut.
Hmm.
And I've just been like maintaining there. And so I'm pushing it up a little bit more. But I've also noticed that like the weeks where there was like last week or the week before, my movement was a lot lower than it usually is. So that kind of had a take on the scale. And when I say movement, just like walking around and stuff.
Yeah.
which a lot of people don't realize too. Like that's why, tracking those things like your movement, your steps, your neat non-exercise activity, like that plays a big role in maintenance as well, I think. And like you said, if
Totally.
you're sitting on the couch and eating pizza versus, being active and not even just within your workouts, but like throughout the rest of the day, like right now I'm standing up, so this is adding to that factor as well. So yeah, I say I'm right around there, but I want to, obviously keep pushing and keep getting a little bit uncomfortable, but obviously I don't want to get to that point where I'm, like we said, you don't want to be gaining too much to the point where you're super uncomfortable, and then also it's just harder for you to, be in that advantageous place to build muscle without gaining too much body fat. So
Yeah, that's super important. I feel like there's no benefit to just getting sloppy big and just eating ad nauseum. But when you like embrace the fact that, hey, look, I'm gonna put on a little bit of body fat, but I'm also gonna put on a lot of muscle, and you get excited, you get more excited about the fact that you're putting on muscle and seeing the lifts go up in the gym, then you get discouraged. Like when you're more excited about that progress than you are discouraged about the slight body fat you gain, that's when you know you're in a good healthy spot.
yeah, for sure. Like I've been hitting PRs like every single day basically. Like in
Hmm.
all of my lifts. Like yesterday I was doing safety bar split squats, which are like my arch nemesis because they're just so freaking hard.
Hmm.
But I was like repping out like more than I have ever and just kept putting the weight in the bar, kept feeling like by the end of it I was like dead, but it felt good to like have like be fueled enough and feel good during that. Um, so yeah, I think also that's something too to realize, especially if you are going through a lean gains phase, we call it, or a bulk or whatever it is, like focusing more on the performance side of things can be a huge mental shift versus like focusing on that scale and the body composition. So kind of shifting gears in that sense, I think is super beneficial.
Totally agree. I totally derailed your questions there. So what was the next question?
No, no, you're good. You're good. So the last question, and this is what I always ask people at the end. What's something that you've changed your mind about in the last year and why?
Should have probably prepared myself more for this question and given you a better
Sorry.
answer.
You can take some
um,
time.
it doesn't have to be
It can
nutrition
be
related.
no, no, no. It can be anything at all.
So honestly, like figuring out, like I think the most growth and also seemingly like the most stagnation in my life. So the most growth and the most stagnation kind of juxtapose against each other. For me, happens in my relationship with Crystal because we just have a very unique relationship in the fact that we're doing a lot of things that most people, especially our age, are just not doing. I feel like I've got the training more or less figured out. I feel like I've got the nutrition more or less figured out. I feel like I got business more or less figured out. Always growing in all of those and learning more as I go. But like the relationship is something that I have no problem in admitting that I have not yet got figured out. I mean, she's the only girl I've ever been with, and she's the only she's the only person I've ever been with. So like I'm constantly trying to evolve and figure out how I can best fill her cup and be the best person I can be for her. But it's weird because I'm also, like we're business partners in the same business. We live in the warehouse. Our bed is in a office in this building. I mean, it's just a very strange life. And I'm constantly trying to figure out how I can grow and develop that. So as far as things that I've changed my mind on. It's not necessarily that I've changed my mind. It's just that I've realized that I am not an expert. I'm used to being really good at everything I pursue, and it's humbling to be in a relationship in which we do have hard times. We do have arguments. We do have disagreements. So I'm having to constantly like step back and evaluate how I'm doing something and how I can be doing it better and where I'm wrong and where I can grow and mature. So that'd probably be where my most constant growth is happening right now.
Awesome, awesome. And then also too, like, I mean, that's super important. And we actually had Crystal was on, I believe it'll probably be like 2 months ago now when this comes out. So if you're listening and you haven't checked out the podcast with Robert's wife, Crystal, we'll link that in the show notes so listeners can check that out. But in terms of, so I'm just thinking about the last year too, like in terms of like just the whole 2020 quarantine pandemic that we've been going through. Do you have any insights from that, from like, what your business is like? Have you like realized anything from that, or any takeaways from like going through this type of time that we're in, I guess you can call it?
Yeah, the big takeaway that I can say about the pandemic is that shit happens, all right? You can't push the pause button on life because things are not going your way. You know, there's been a lot of people, I mean, everybody, I think it's safe to say that every single person has been impacted in some form or fashion by this pandemic, some negatively, some positively, some superficially, some very deep. Um, it's not a great thing. There's no way to say that this is a great thing, but it doesn't mean that you can make something great out of it. So there's been several businesses that have been negatively impacted. I mean, it totally wiped my competition plans out of the picture, totally wiped all the conferences that we had scheduled to go to out of the picture. And when the pandemic was really rearing its ugly head, and there was just a ton of uncertainty in the air, you know, we had been working behind the scenes for months trying to save up the money, and we were under contract on this building purchase. And here I am as a businessman who employs several people and is looked at as, I have a lot of responsibility. Am I making the right decision or the wrong decision by investing in this business, investing in this building, and pulling myself, stretching myself pretty thin financially in order to make all this work during this massive time of uncertainty? And I just realized that, hey, look, fortune favors the bold. Like, if you can be bold and if you can be, responsible, but also have, some degree of risk and have that, just aggressiveness in life, you can't ever expect things to stop and slow down. And you can't expect life to push pause because you're not ready for it. So for me, I learned to just trust my gut, be bold, be aggressive, and do the right thing. If you're constantly doing the right thing in life and you're never sacrificing your integrity, then whatever happens, whether it's good or bad, it's always going to be good because you will have learned something from it and you'll be strong in your belief for that decision.
I love it. I love it. That is a very good place to end because you just crushed that. Um, awesome. All right. Well, do you want to tell our listeners and viewers where they can find you on social media? Tell us all your business. I don't, is that plural? I don't know how you say
Something
that.
like that.
Businesses, websites,
Yeah.
and
So,
social media and all that stuff.
yep. So Keto Savage, anything Keto Savage, that's me. So Google that, ketosavage.com. That's where I'm at on social. Ketobrick.com and Keto Brick on social for the bricks. And then Live Savage Apparel for the apparel. We've kind of had to push pause on the apparel. Speaking of not pushing pause, but we've kind of had to push pause on the apparel. But we've got some pretty exciting things coming in the pipeline for that. So Live Savage Apparel for all things apparel.
Sweet. And then you have some other things coming down the line
Yeah.
that you can't talk about yet?
I could talk about it a little bit. So we got the building that we're renovating, which is going to be super awesome. I'm just like over the moon with that. That's going to be incredibly exciting when we unveil the building. But then I'm writing a book right now, so that should be hopefully done. At least the first draft will be done by the end of this year. Hopefully that'll launch sometime early next year, and it's going to have an accompanying like online course all about competition prep as it relates to the ketogenic diet. So basically taking everything that I've learned over the years and compiling it into a book and course to get people on the right track.
Sweet.
So,
Awesome. Can't wait for that.
yep, I'm excited.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much for taking the time. I think you definitely, yeah, we a little bit over an hour, so
Nice.
hit that goal.
Beautiful. Well, the quality is what's there, not the quantity. It's always quality time talking with you, Rachel. So I appreciate it.
Yeah, I appreciate you. Oh, now our quality's breaking up a little bit, but right at the end. So awesome. Good timing though. All right, I will talk to you soon.
Take care.